The Diary of Thoughts, Part 32. Life and Death. This chapter contains a tough subject for me to write. I guess it happens with most of us. Be ready to read some things, some realities that are not easy to digest. In my case, it is because I lost my dear wife some months ago, which doesn't give the will to write about this situation, meaning that it is also very painful for me to write about this subject. Additionally, unlike any other event in life, right or wrong, the several situations that I'm referring to also brought me a different meaning about death itself. Since I was a young child, I was confronted with life and death. Death is a reality that most of us can handle when it doesn't concern the ones we love, even though we never feel happy or comfortable with the death of others to whom we are not related. This reaction makes part of a word called humanism that fortunately is familiar to the majority of people. I was raised while a child by a surrogate mother since my real one didn't have the time or devotion to doing it as a result of certain circumstances in her life. That surrogate mother brought everything that I needed regarding attention, affection, and tenderness and care. As life herself brings her compensations, these feelings helped me a lot in my personal formation along with the evaluation of fundamental values that always persisted along my road. She was not only a friend but also a companion, and she replaced an important role that normally has to take place in a child's life. As life is sometimes very cruel, even to children, I was confronted with death while being about 14 years old as this mother of mine just passed away right in front of my eyes. As life has strange coincidences, later on, and very recently to be more precise, my adopted grandson assisted to my late dear wife's final moment along with me, and he reacted the same way I did while still a child like him. For me it was a revival of old nightmares that a child has to endure, still never forgetting about it. There are different notions about life and death, not only connected with a metaphysical definition but also related to the various ages as we understand this fact in another perspective, being this one adapted to our time. If not, children wouldn't have the necessary resistance and persistence to keep on walking their road of life. While being a child, we regard death as a deep sleep and our notion of this tragic fact stays minimized. By this fact, we have the sensation that we're eternal as we're just beginning, and this thought is bringing us the necessary energy and strength to keep on going. As I mentioned before on this document, my grandfather on my father's side always raised me under a cold perspective about death. In fact, I found myself and later on in my life facing a self-behavior that was in a certain way conditioned to that education, being this one a constant in any tragic circumstance that I went through. Suffering from a terminal disease, I had to carry him in my arms so that he could move when I was 16 years old. This situation happened as a result of the misunderstanding of other people around him and concerning his physical condition. At that time and even at that age, I took consciousness about the selfishness and detachment of some people, forgetting about the sad reality of another human being, just because it was not comfortable for them to assure his well-being. As I loved that old man as he was my grandfather, I wouldn't have minded carrying him on my shoulders for the rest of my life, so I did it until his last moment, my second experience about death. Later on, I assisted to my father posting on his home's wall, a poem that he wrote about my grandfather where he asked forgiveness for every single misjudgment or attitude he could have made towards him, exactly as I did when he passed away. It's a reality that life repeats as an eternal cycle, leaving its marks and conditioning human behaviors as we all possess an intrinsic selfishness that doesn't allow us to understand some vital things in life, as love and compassion. Normally, it's when we lose a person that we love that we give them their right value, their real importance in our lives. This awakening happens in every type of relationship, concerning family or friends, though I think this would happen to the most of us as nobody's perfect. Two precious persons to my life were gone right in front of me. A few years later, his wife, my grandmother, also passed away while I was present as my grandparents lived at my father's place. Once again I had to face the tragic reality. I was already married at that time, and we all lived together as a real family. As life continued her way, similar events occurred when I had to take my father to Sweden also with a terminal disease, by coincidence the same one as my grandfather's, his father. I was about 24 years old, and I have all those images present on my soul, since the moment we landed at Stockholm Airport where an ambulance was waiting for us, Until the moment he phoned my mother to say goodbye. It was the first time I had the notion of how important it is to a person to believe in life and fighting for it. At what point illusions and dreams can keep us alive. As a matter of fact, my father knew about the problem he had but tried to ignore it to keep alive. As there are some different mentalities around us, we have to consider that there are also different behaviors and attitudes, sometimes related to life and death. A medical formation added to that mentality can severely damage, even eliminate the will to fight for life of a patient. That's what happened with my father when his doctor came to his room and told him about his terminal disease. After he had left his room, my father asked me for the phone and called my mother. I remember his last words to me when he said, "You were there for me until the end, after all." That moment I had a chill, and I knew what was about to happen. That same night, he passed away. For the fourth time in my life I had to face the reality of death, this time at an older age, but completely alone in a foreign country, far away from home. You can guess that it was not a situation very easy to handle. It was due to the education my grandfather gave to me and related to his theory about life and death, that I could react and surmount that challenging and painful moment. I reacted as a machine, the only thing that gave me the necessary strength to go back home without my father. A few months later I had a nervous breakdown that lasted for some time by the fact that I accumulated all those events in my soul, in spite of having reacted as a robot, it didn't avoid the emotional consequences produced by the tragic experience. Independently from our education, all the theories related to it are worthless as our hearts and souls feel and react in a different way. This behavior also defines the difference between human beings and machines. It is a fact that sometimes we react as machines, but this also means that we are following a natural mechanism that makes us survive, and it is present in the most difficult moments of our existence. Without that particularity, that instinct of survival, we would not be able to overcome those situations and would perish. Death is not easy to accept, I would say impossible to accept, as we also think about our ending at the same time, which ultimately legitimizes that behavior. In fact, everybody wants to go to heaven, but nobody wants to die. This last sentence that I just quoted is connected to spiritual values and defines at what point there is a notion that is living deep inside of us about the continuity of life. Unconsciously, we all feel that death might not represent an end but a new beginning, and this brings us the necessary hope to be able to surrender to this natural event from which nobody can escape. The constant formula that is present in everything and everybody is that there is a beginning and end to every single event in life, and extended to the minimal existing particle in the universe. If we think that we make part of this universe we are living, this also means that beginning and end might not exist, but a continuity of life under multiple different forms. As we are limited in our intelligence, our vision is restricted to the doubts and fears caused by the misunderstanding about our origins, about our beginning and our end. If it weren't like that, we would not prevail in this dimension, as most of the time life leads us to situations of misery and despair that bring us the will to reach that end. The purpose of creation would be lost, we wouldn't be living. I wrote something about the beginning and end that I would like you to read, as it defines the legitimacy of believing in the invisible, the continuity, without excluding all doubts implied on that belief. Hank the Voice BEUKEMA reads from the Diary of Thoughts poems, written by Carlos Pacheco.
Beginning and end. There is no beginning or end, as there is no enemy without a friend. There is no beginning or end without a feeling, as there is no child born from the storm, but from love. There is no beginning or end, as love represents the stars above, the continuity, the dignity of life. There is no beginning or end, as the sky tells us that we'll never die. We will join it, we won't cry, but we will laugh. There is no beginning or end, as no one can understand the meaning of life. It's like a wife that we want to keep forever. There is no beginning or end, as it would be too cruel that God created a rule to contradict, to submit their children to an end. He wouldn't be a friend. There is no beginning or end, as everything that was born will take a new form of existence, confirming the persistence of life. There is no beginning or end, while a new child is born every day. Our belief, our faith, will stay in our heart. We'll wait. We'll hope for that rope that will take us to a new start.
In our daily lives, there is always a new start, beginning the moment when we wake up and ending the time we go to sleep, still always existing in both states. Everything in life implicates a beginning and end as we rule ourselves by procedures that begin and end. A computer, an engine, a simple device executes a program, a task or a function with a starting point and an end. Mathematics and methods are submitted to formulas with a start and an end while performing its goal to serve humankind. Day and night defines the end of a natural cycle that is interdependent, as there wouldn't be the day without the night, which makes them reborn again and again in an eternal motion where time and space don't exist. Planets are submitted to their orbit where there is a starting point that finally meet again after the circle is finished, and at the same time also expressing an eternal motion, an eternal movement. Considering these few examples about beginning and end, we have to reach the conclusion that human beings clearly understand these concepts and realities, accepting their cycle of existence that also implies those two elements. Since our findings are based on intelligence and logic, human beings can create and develop new instruments and devices, but unable to go further away than what they can conceive, only reaching what their eyes can see and what their reasoning can bring to them. Right now we get to the point where different elements interfere as belief and conviction. For these two factors, there are no mathematical definitions, as they are purely spiritual and depending on each one of us. There are religions that, in spite of the fact of believing in God, they say that there is no continuity in spiritual terms. This statement is a contradiction, as it limits the power of the Creator and all His alleged perfection along with their religion, as this last one is based on spirituality as any other one. In fact, and according to with all my personal views on this subject, I think that, if there will be a final selection made by the Creator, it will be by belief and conviction, these being the only key to attaining another path, a spiritual path. For those who believe in a continuity of life, it means that their existence will always be present along with the Creator, in a spiritual form. Metaphysics is a complicated word due to its meaning, as it involves philosophy connected to everything and everybody, even with movements, with motion. Sometimes I find myself writing about these subjects without noticing it, and this is a very strange sensation. There is that very dear friend of mine, a beautiful soul, that once told me that there is a purpose for everything, and that maybe the final purpose of my existence it will be to write about what I think, about what I feel. At that moment, I told her that maybe, the time that I will finish this book, it will be the time for me to leave. She stayed a little bit shocked, but it might be true, only God knows. Of course, there is a purpose for everything, and this one includes a beginning and end that is related to every single event in the universe. But also related to these two words, other existing elements define a notion of eternity as eternal love, eternal feelings, for those who believe in them and mostly feel them. Finally, is just like belief and conviction that brings us the necessary faith to attain spiritual development. At this point, we have to ask, why is it so difficult just to live and integrate into our mother creation? It would be a form of avoiding to pose questions to ourselves, an open door to happiness. It would be a limitation to our evolution as human beings, and maybe we were contradicting the final purpose of life herself, as life is nothing but energy and logic waiting to be understood. Isn't it a reality that we are always looking for some answers that we simply ignore? Isn't it true that we are never satisfied and imposing to ourselves a certain rhythm to look, to try to discover our inner doubts, about our origins, about our existence? This whole context that surrounds us and dominates us, to which we are all submitted to, creates the necessary motivation to keep on searching, to keep on evolving. This phenomenon makes that invisible balance that interferes with several areas of our lives, from the intellectual, to the spiritual one, using our material form to achieve its final goal. The human mind, the human spirit, are the key to understand everything, the key to reaching every single existing answer in the universe, as we just merely capture a small particle of the whole message that at the same time translates our limitation about the whole context, the grand design. The incomprehension about our final destiny, meaning our material end, causes us the necessary need to find all the possible explanations about this same fact, this same doubt about the beginning and the end. Maybe the real challenge stays at the point when each one of us, individually, reaches the belief and conviction in our souls, our spirits, that there is something above our understanding, still to which we all belong, from where we came from, and finally we will return. There are some written words by Kendra Lascelles that were pronounced on the third album of the band Chicago that translates the doubt that we are living, all of us. It goes like this. When all the laughter dies in sorrow. When all the laughter dies in sorrow. And the tears have risen to a flood. When all the wars have found a cause. In human wisdom and in blood. Do you think they'll cry in sadness? Do you think the eye will blink? Do you think they'll curse the madness? Do you think they'll think? When all the great galactic systems light to a frozen halt in space. Do you think there will be some remnant of beauty of the human race? Or a snuffle or a star? Do you think a greater thinking thing will give a damn that man was there? Kendra Lascelles. Mostly, the fourth side of this album mentions the decadence of human civilization while searching for complicated answers that are present, still not being respected, and that finally will lead to bringing us down in the drain that we all created or contributed to existing. This drain is nothing than the result of our incomprehension about our existence and the lack of respect towards that gift that the Creator gave us, to exist. Another incredible album that is based on time and space is the Moody Blues LP On the Threshold of a Dream, where they just travel in time along with fantastic music and existential messages as content. Coming back to the main subject of this chapter, life and death, there is also another difficult area to discuss, and it's related to the word suicide. Suicide is a word that is associated with other important notions as self-determination, self-dignity and self-respect. We can also associate suicide with the inherent lack of respect towards those same three concepts, depending on its context. Nowadays we are dealing with a certain polemic about the right of some patients to choose their destiny, their end, when they find themselves in a terminal physical state. For people who experience similar situations along their lives, and assisted to the suffering that is present in those specific contexts, it's easy to understand the inner need of a patient to decide about his life. Several years ago there was this incredible movie with Richard Dreyfuss called Whose Life Is It Anyway? That defines exactly this particular situation and at the same time reveals the resident intellectuality of a man that understands the purpose of his existence along with the purpose of his end. We have to consider that the real legitimacy of self-determination is affected by several elements imposed by society, starting on religion, along with other principles related to the several and different cultures and educations. We have to consider in the first place that this kind of decision must be avoided as it is extreme. But we also have to think that living as a vegetable can become the cruelest form of life and torture in this world of ours. In these cases, it's the human factor that prevails in spite of the existence of any conventional notions about this subject. I mention the religious factor because this one is related with massive suicides along with criminal behaviors, as terrorist attempts are being committed almost every week in the name of religion, and implying the suicide of those who are practicing it, along with the gradual genocide committed on others. Also, religion is based on concepts about suffering to endure and mature our souls, but these components must be analyzed mostly regarding a kind of suffering leading to evolving spiritually under particular circumstances, and not under the purpose of submitting any human being to a condition where their self-dignity and self-respect are at stake. If we take the example of the story about Jesus Christ, we'll arrive at the conclusion that the final message is that we all have to accept that suffering as he himself did. But forgetting that in his story, the ones that crucified him are the same ones that are killing the whole society nowadays. Independently from the fact that this story about Xxxii is true or not, and I honestly do believe it is real, it also translates a manipulative message to use religion to persuade people to accept that kind of suffering. It represents at the same time that human beings didn't evolve enough to avoid sufferance, which I think it would be the final purpose and message of Jesus himself. But instead they are promoting the example of his sufferance in the name of religion. It's a fact that sufferance leads to introspection and conclusions, leading these last ones to solutions. While suffering, we are thinking, and at the same time, We are finding the answer to existing conflicts and realities that we have to face and endure. Instead of suffering, we are evolving in a sense that we don't realize. Going back to this last subject that no one likes to hear about, suicide and self-determination. The word suicide is also connected with several different forms of committing it, as many people are committing an involuntary suicide while forgetting about fundamental principles and values that can lead society to a suicidal state, namely concerning the environment and the economy. I am almost sure that most cases of suicide are the result of the pressure that people are nowadays submitted to, as we all are living under stress caused by our struggle for survival in a world that is lost within wrong concepts about technological and economical evolution and its supposed appliance. At a personal level, this attitude depends on each one's soul along with the resistance and courage to face all the eventual obstacles and problems generated by society but interfering on each person's lives. I call it the real battlefield. Let's not forget that the components self-dignity and self-respect play a fundamental role in some people's lives, in spite that the majority of the citizens are forgetting about these values and principles and merely surviving, no matter how. There is this incredible movie directed by Clint Eastwood, $1 Million Baby, that puts in evidence the feelings involved on that fact that self-determination is a legitimate right of each one, mostly when love leads to the comprehension that the sufferance of those we adore is something that we all refuse to assist. The strength of the human spirit is also fundamental and defines each person, as there were individuals who survived extermination camps, and others committing suicide for a simple contrariety in life, mostly people who never understood or respected life as a divine gift. Existential problems related to inner values and principles sometimes leads to ultimate decisions as the meaning of life is no longer there, along with the misunderstanding of this sacred word, meaning that the word selfishness is also implied on that extreme attitude. In fact, considering ourselves as the greatest victims of all, and without taking into account all the existing sad contexts that are present around us, it is a pure act of selfishness. I am personally persuaded that almost every one of us has thought about suicide as a word and not with the will to commit it, this not invalidating the fact that the thought crossed our minds sometimes, in some circumstances. It's certain that suicide is directly related with unhappiness and suffering that are common elements in people's lives. Years ago, when I was still freshly married with my beloved wife, I experienced this specific situation that influenced my life a lot. I was working in an office in Portugal at the time, and there was this boss of mine that was an incredible person. His intellectual level was very high, and I learned lots of positive things with him. At a certain moment, I got to know that he was suffering from a lethal disease, but he never told me that. I was invited to dinner at his place with his beautiful family, and he had a great respect towards me as he appreciated my way of thinking and the way I worked and achieved some professional goals at the aim of that company. Some time later I was offered a new contract and left that company, and he tried several times that I would come back and work again by his side, but the financial conditions I was offered at the time didn't allow that decision from me. Years later, I was told that he had passed away, which was a big shock for me. But the most amazing thing that I came to know, it was the fact that they told me that he had disappeared for 3 months before his death. Even his family didn't have any idea where he was being treated, and that caused a certain polemic at the aim of his family and friends. At that moment, I had to explain my point of view about this subject, and I expressed very clearly that I would have done the same as my character was considerably identical with his. In fact, I consider that his decision was based on dignity and pride, a subject that I will mention in the final part of this book. The fact to submit his family and friends to that sad scenery was his concern. Terminating as a vegetable in front of his dearest people around him would cause him worse suffering than his actual physical condition. Some people classify that as an act of pure selfishness, but I truly think that was exactly the contrary, along with an act of extreme courage to assume his sufferance along with his sad reality. It takes a real man to do something like that. This gesture also reveals our legitimate right of self-determination, even if this is applied to our existence, the right to live in pride and the right to die in dignity. Coming back to the subject of religion, I have to mention a strange coincidence that occurred yesterday. I never read any Bible in my life, as I always guided myself by my convictions and beliefs. Nevertheless, I find myself writing about certain notions that are present in every single one of them. I was watching this little Spanish production about the life of Jesus Christ called The Disciple. This movie is presented without the pretension of showing amazing images and sceneries that would translate, even adulterate the role of Xxxii, but instead they were very precise about the final message that the movie was supposed to give. They mentioned Xxxii's weaknesses as a human being. He was, along with all the manipulation about his ideals and convictions to maintain religious and political power. The movie finishes with a critical sentence, claiming that the most of the atrocities, even genocides committed along history, were made in the name of God. No comments about this sad reality. At a certain point they showed Xxxii talking about beginning and end, and that was a very scary thing for me to verify that he was mentioning the same principles about this subject as I describe on the poem. I became reassured that in spite that there will be some people who will not agree, even misunderstand what I am writing, there is some content that translates things, events, states of mind, states of spirit, which were present centuries ago and actually, were always present along history. In other areas, his behavior matched my principles and values, mostly in what concerns condescendence and understanding, even respect that he had towards prostitution, where mostly his compassion and love were present to absorb the reasons that lead to this specific situation. In fact, he was in love with a prostitute, which reveals that feelings of love and compassion have no barriers, along with the fact that he was a human being like the rest of us. Also concerning friendship, he also understood and forgave the betrayal that he already knew was going to happen, much before its occurrence. Compassion and forgiveness due to his existing love towards people originated this behavior of his. The identification of what I am writing and trying to spread that message at the same time, and those words that were proffered by some disciples or prophets, is astonishing, in spite that it doesn't make me become a religious person, as I have my personal Jesus, my personal religion. That makes me think that there is this grand design that translates the structure of our souls and that is present in each one of us, making us realize what right and wrong is, what is positive and negative, what finally is beautiful and ugly. False notions about life and death are controlling human beings, as we don't understand our origins and ignore about our final destination. If we were confident about those two elements, we wouldn't be here, living in this dimension, as that uncertainty make us live, make us survive, as the final understanding is just not present in this path. Finally, it depends on our beliefs and convictions, which will bring us the necessary strength and energy to overcome our obstacles, our doubts and fears by having our religion. It's all about belief, it's all about conviction. The Diary of Thoughts, end of part 32, written by Carlos Pacheco. www.diaryofthoughts.com